Alrighty, folks, it's time for the final thoughts on Grand Prix Dawnbloom Grove. So, quick prelude before we get into it. I was about to upload my final thoughts video, had the video in there and everything, and I was just booting it up to watch through it all and start picking out time cards. And I was looking at the 37-minute runtime of the final thoughts and went, that's just kind of asking way too much of everybody's time for me to talk about a deck that I think just has some really good things going for it, but has some issues. So I'm gonna try and make this a lot briefer. One of the other side effects of me re-recording and retaking this final thoughts video is that I have already spectated and commentated on the finals match. That should be coming in about a day's time, give or take. So keep your eyes peeled for that. At the end card, where I always have the two recommendations for where to go next, the video, recommended video and recommended playlist. The recommended video will be set to be the finals match as soon as that is uploaded. So let's talk about Survivor Stompy, what worked, what didn't work. And then the second half of this is going to be a brief acknowledgement of what I think I would change and sort of showing a sample deck list for where I think this archetype can and should go moving forward. So the biggest thing that I kind of hammered a lot this GP run was that I think the Black Splash was a mistake. I think Exorcist of Errors is, of course, a really stellar card. It's probably one of the best creatures in the format, but I think in a deck that is looking to push aggression and consistent, resilient aggression like this deck is, I think it's just a bit faltering in terms of its overall strength and performance. It had some matchups where it really mattered. The big one to me is in our last match against Dr. Chipmunk. Exorcist, especially in multiples, is really good at taking away things we really can't afford to be staring at from across the table. And in a deck that is really light on removal like this, that can be very valuable. But I think Exorcist thrives most in either decks that can abuse its interaction with Ozon's Blessing, uh, can abuse it with cases of being able to make additional copies of it, or especially cases where you are applying additional pressure to your opponent's resources, their hands, their permanents, beyond just having Exorcist of Errors. So a deck like Sultai Golems, which is on Ozon's Blessing, is on a clone effect, is on these annoying creatures like Unspeaking Titan to just lock down opposing creatures, and Unflinching Titan to rip away cards in the opponent's hand. I think Exorcist thrives a lot more there than it does in a stompy shell like this. So I think Exorcist is the big kind of knock here, and I think the black cards in the sideboard, I'd like to do more experimenting with Moonlight Adversary. I've been thinking about what a black-red build of Survivor Stompy looks like. Or like Survivor Looters in Black Red. And I think Moonlight Adversary probably does more work there, where it is not such a like hindrance. But it's just the stat line doesn't do what you need this creature and need this slot to do in this particular build. And it just didn't really come up. And I've been pretty darn disappointed with Anik Oathbound and Davika Severed. I'll keep ringing this bell until the end of my days. That 2/2 black zombie creature token is really unfortunate. Can't block is just such a rough line of text on a planeswalker for the token to be unable to defend it. I understand that the -1 makes it able to be defended, but I think there are so many decks that are just able to spit out trinket permanents, or like things that they don't care about as much, that the -1 feels really, really rough in a lot of cases. And we even got to see that the one match where I felt like the -1 was really good in, and it did do some work, which is against Golems there in the in the quarterfinals. It's just not enough. This much like Exorcist of Errors needs to be paired with other things that are applying pressure to the opponent's resources. And in the case of Davika, the thing that really is the nail in the coffin for her is that again, she just cannot protect herself effectively and meaningfully, so she's not a long-term value engine. So if you're willing to jump through the hoop of getting Anik in your graveyard, having your life total change the turn that you want to cast her for 4, and spending 4 mana on Davika to have target opponent sacrifices a thing for 3 turns, sure, I think that might be like okay and decent, but why put yourself through that? We have better options for something like that in the field. We just have better interaction, better Staxy effects like that. So I think Davika is just not really worth it right now, and definitely didn't really help justify the Black Splash at all. So I think the Black Splash was overall a mistake. The Swamps, the Sanguine Palaces, the Profane Groves often were just kind of either tapped basic lands, or in the case of the Swamp, was often just sort of a colorless land in terms of functionality. And that's just kind of unfortunate. I think the Splash was just not worth more inconsistent mana. Otherwise, though, I did like a lot of the choices that I made with deck building. I think Ignited Soul, Calamity Cat, Huskforger, Acolyte are all really sweet. They're really good 1-drops. I was pleasantly surprised by how much I liked Calamity Cat in spite of its nerf. Losing haste is a big deal for Calamity Cat, but the additional point of power does still make it a relevant body on the board, so I do appreciate that. Gilded New Entertainer, I'm kind of iffy on. I think, it's still a very annoying attacker, but I had a hard time justifying putting it in play over other things a lot of times over the course of the GP run, so I'll have to play Gilded New Entertainer more to land on exactly how I feel about it. Reaper of Blossoms, I'm also iffy on. I think it's really good in this shell in particular because of Fabricated Anomaly, but I think in a lot of cases it does look kind of awkward, and as we saw in one of our first matches, it can be a liability if you get too many copies of this out and don't have a lot of pressure being set up. So that is something that you do have to be mindful of for a deck like this. Otherwise, I think my biggest regret with deck building besides the Black Splash is I should have been on more copies of Spirit Realm Phoenix. I'll talk about Kieran Boons when we get to how I would rebuild this deck, but as much as I talked about how I should have been on Kieran Boons, I should have been on more copies of Spirit Realm Phoenix. I think one of the big things that I remember feeling in May was that while Kieran of Boons was probably the most messed up thing that this deck was capable of doing, because it just was a permanent target, creatures target opponent controls can't block this turn. Spirit Realm Phoenix as a 3/3 flyer with haste that deals 1 to the opponent off of a foreign encounter is really good. Foreign encounter hitting a 3/3 flyer, or hitting a 2/2 flyer with haste and then giving it a +1/+1 counter is really good. I think maybe it's a condemnation of foreign encounter that the best thing you can do with it is hit a 2/2 flyer with haste right now. Maybe that is an indication that foreign encounter is just not worthwhile. But I have been really happy with hitting Spirit Realm Phoenix off of foreign encounter every time I've done so, and I think, especially with how clunky Dawnsworn Survivor felt in a couple of the cases over the course of this GP run, I think you go more copies of Spirit Realm Phoenix, maybe go down a copy or 2 of Dawnsworn Survivor. Also help you get more consistency in your hits on foreign encounter there. Otherwise, though, Fabricated Anomaly is really good. I think Dawnsworn Survivor is fine for the most part. I've liked Foreign Encounter. I continue liking Foreign Encounter. And Abominable Avalanche felt a little clunky as well. I'm not super sold on keeping that in the main. I'm not sold on having any non-creature spells other than Foreign Encounter in the main at this point, honestly. But I think if you do want something like Abominable Avalanche in the main, I think you just want Terminal Impact instead. I think it's just way more flexible, way more powerful, and it really gets to continue showing itself that this is just one of her best direct damage spells in the format right now. Otherwise, on the sideboard, I think Ozon's Blessing is kind of just a miss for this strategy in general. I think it's not really worth your time. Exorcist is really the only interesting thing to get with it in the main, and I was very often boarding Exorcist out, so I think if you're playing Ozon's Blessing and you're playing Exorcist and you want to be getting Exorcist with Ozon's Blessing, I think your deck needs to care more about Blessing for that to matter. Otherwise, Purifier off Ozon's Blessing is sweet, but it never really came up to my recollection. Purifier is still a very good card, though. I think Purifier is very real. I like Purifier a lot in a deck like this. So that's my thoughts on where this deck is at overall. And let me just load up a adjusted. Let me load up an adjusted version of this deck real quick. So this is how I would sort of approach uh, pivoting it to red green. We get a fourth mountain in here. We get a fourth primal fisher. We get playset of Temple of Origins. And two meandering paths. First two turns are the most critical, and then having a land that can cycle itself in a pinch. So even without looting engines in play, you can still discard this to draw a card. Can be pretty nice. I've been pleasantly surprised by how much I've liked the paths recently, especially in decks looking to do more on the early turns. So just having more red and green sources for turn one, so that way you can play Huskforge or Acolyte into like Spirit Realm Phoenix potentially as a turn two is nice. Or if you're on like Meandering Path Mountain, you can still go Acolyte into foreign encounter. That's pretty nice as well. So that's the change to the mana base. I'm also going up an additional land from 20 to 21. While I think I do like keeping this deck a little lighter on lands, I've messed around with versions of this deck that had as few as 18 lands in the past. I think one of the things that is still very real is that Mana Screw sucks. And for a deck that has its curve so low, while the first couple lands are really important, you need those first couple of lands. And especially when you have something like Dawnsworn Survivor that wants you to cast multiple spells in a turn, hitting additional land drops is still valuable. It's why I still like Reaper of Blossoms in a deck like this. And it's why I think I do want to go up to 21 lands, because one of the other advantages of being on so many discard effects and looter effects is, Ignited Soul, Fabricated Anomaly, Gilded New Entertainer, Calamity Cat. You have ways to get rid of excess lands if you're flooding out. So while it's not perfect, I do like it more than just kind of resigning yourself to, having to run a lower land count to make your aggressive curve feel better and to have more threat density. But now that we are down on any non-creatures other than foreign encounter in the main, we only have Dawnsworn Survivor as a miss on encounter, and we're down to three survivors from 4 up to the full 4 Spirit Realm Phoenix. And then of course the only other change in the creature base is playset of Kieran of Boons, because this card is absolutely nuts. I compared it to Unspeaking Titan in the quarterfinals. I think, obviously Unspeaking Titan runs circles around Kieran of Boons in a lot of ways, but I do still think Kieran of Boons is the most messed up thing that this deck can be doing. To the point where I think I've been talking with folks about trying to build a red-white build of this deck. Let me see if I can carefully move my mouse. Talking about trying to make a like white-red build of Looter Stompy, so that way Kieran of Boons has consistency between Fabricated Anomaly and Consume the Divine. And so when I'm talking about how good I think Kieran of Boons is, I think it justifies trying to make triple white pip red spells work, where you're playing Consume the Divine, Fabricated Anomaly, Kieran of Boons, and then potentially, like Gilded New Entertainer, Calamity Cat, probably not Spirit Realm Phoenix. But like I think that is the level of which I think Kieran of Boons is good, is that I think it's worth trying to bend over backwards to make triple white happen, just so that way you have more consistency with getting a bunch of counter generation across your board. I missed Menelaya. Menelaya was a really, really key part of getting good early counter generation for a deck like this. I think Menelaya really hurt this deck by leaving. But I think Kieran of Boons is still worth the trouble, even if we have fewer counter generation cards right now. And then, of course, as always, as we get future rotations, as we get buff patches, anytime we get new goodies for +1/+1 counter strategies, I'm going to keep my eye on Kieran of Boons, because this card is nuts. Otherwise, updated sideboard thoughts. I think Terminal Impact, again, is just really critical, going up the full playset of those in the sideboard tentatively. Same with Purifier of Dawnbloom Grove. And then two other changes to the sideboard. As much as I think that there is appeal in Abominable Avalanche, spending 5 mana is really tricky for this deck, even if you've got like 3-drop, 2-drop. Just because previously I had 20 lands and now there's 21, but it's still, you kind of empty your hand out fast enough that Abominable Avalanche's 3/3 condition is really hard to meet. I think Advanced Fire and Faith is just the better check for what your opponent is doing. Cleans up more creatures, cleans up more of the board, even if it doesn't push damage face. And then you can just invest 3 damage into this to have your creatures have haste for the rest of the game. So, a 3/3 Spirit Realm Phoenix clears Advance of Fire and Faith, and then your creatures have haste for the rest of the game, so you can play a Dawnsworn Survivor and swing immediately. Or, play Fabricated Anomaly or Gilded New Entertainer and immediately get in. And if there's one thing that I think I am taking away from my experience with this deck over 2 GPs of playing it, it's that Calamity Cat, even without haste, proves that having a good, efficient way to generate hasty threats is really meaningful in a lot of cases. So I really like Calamity Cat. I really like Advance of Fire and the Faith as a sideboard tool to fight low to the ground, go wide decks, as well as give the deck some momentum in sideboard matchups. Otherwise, Coordinated Shot is the other big one. We have a trio of 1-drops in the deck, as well as a low curve overall, so that flashback cost of sacrificing a creature isn't actually the trickiest thing in the world. And I think I just like having a lightning strike, even if it's at sorcery speed. More damage, more flexibility. You could, I think it's bleed out. Yeah, bleeding out. You could go for bleeding out instead if you want to just have more priority on instant speed flexibility and pointing things at creatures or planeswalkers and still getting some chip damage to the opponent. And, the red isn't as tricky thanks to just how many duels we have, and we have 4 mountains. So it's like we only have 3 lands in the deck and then a set of dorks that can't cast that. But I think that's fine overall. So if you want to reach for bleeding out instead, that's your prerogative. But I really like Coordinated Shot. I like the flashback, just adding some additional damage. So it really helps you not only fight for the board better, but give you some additional reach. And yeah, that's it. That's the full thoughts on where I think the deck lands, where I would update it. I don't know if I'll play this deck again next month. Part of me wants to, in part, so that way I can kind of develop my brand of being the like red-green looter player, just kind of looting and stompying and pushing as far as I can. But there are other decks I want to try, other ideas that I'm tinkering with, so I don't want to lock myself down to a particular strategy forever. We'll see where things go from here. I may register Dawnsworn Survivor again. I may take a break from it. We'll have to see what the patch notes hold as well for the start of next month. So, yeah. With all of that being said, stay tuned for the finals of GP Dawnbloom Grove coming at you soon, unless you're watching this in the future, at which point it should just be at the end of this video as a little time card. And otherwise, as always, links are in the description below for all things custom Magic. You can check out the Custom Magic Discord server where you can follow along with set projects as they're being developed, or join the Revolution channels to talk about the format and give it a try for yourself. You can check out the Revolution Compendium for a list of cards recommended for use in your decks, handpicked by the Revolution curators. Or you can check out the 2 card search engines, Escape from Limbo and LackeyBot, where you can browse through the full selection of cards from the format and its history. So, overall, I'm happy with where I landed. I didn't know if I would be able to make top cut, so making top cut at all is, even with a deck that I think I was had a little misbuilt, is still a nice marker to the fact that there were some good ideas there. And I do get to take some pride in how I approached it all and how I played it all out. So taking a little bit of pride in the quarterfinals finish there. And can't wait to show you all the finals match. I will tell you now, there's a little bit of awkwardness on my part. You'll probably know what I mean when you get to the game too. But yeah. That wraps up GP Dawnbloom Grove for me. And I can't wait to get into the patch notes for next month and start diving into another month of play. In the meantime, hope you all take care. Hope you're all excited to see my commentary on the finals match. And I'll see you all in the Revolution chat. Bye bye.